Thanksgiving in Wilmington was supposed to be routine. My mom loved staging the whole Norman Rockwell setup: turkey, cranberry sauce, pumpkin pie, all the cliches. My younger sister Lena had married into a crowd that cared way too much about appearances, so, naturally, the house was dressed like a magazine cover. I walked in still in my uniform. Not dress blues, just my mechanic fatigues from Fort Liberty. I didn't have time to change after finishing a maintenance rotation. I thought it wouldn't matter. I was wrong. The second I stepped into the dining room, Lena's voice carried over the chatter. "Who let the army mechanic in?" She smiled at her well-dressed guests like she'd just cracked the funniest joke in the world. A few of them chuckled awkwardly. Others just looked at me and then back at her, like they weren't sure if they should laugh or pretend they didn't hear it. I froze for half a second, pie dish still in my hands. Did she really just say that? My own sister, standing in the middle of the house that only existed because I had bailed her out years ago, reduced me to some grease-stained punchline. My mom swooped in fast, tugging at my elbow like she was embarrassed to even be seen next to me. "Quinn," she whispered urgently, "don't make a scene. This is Lena's night." "Don't make a scene?" My ears burned. I looked around at the table. Expensive wine glasses, perfect linen napkins folded into swans, Lena's husband bragging about his new car to some cousin from Charlotte. Everyone carried on like I was the intruder who needed to be managed. No one said, "That's her sister, and she's served this country for 15 years. No one mentioned I was the reason Lena had finished college, or that I'd kept a foreclosure notice off this very door. Instead, the message was clear: shut up, don't embarrass us. I sat down for all of 3 minutes, the pie still sweating in its foil dish, before I felt the air close in. Lena avoided eye contact, my mother hovered, and the laughter grew louder around me. I had a choice: swallow it like I always had, or walk away before I snapped. I put the pie on the counter, grabbed my jacket, and stepped outside. The November air hit me like a slap, but it was better than staying inside pretending this was normal. As I walked to my car, I heard someone inside asking who made the pecan pie. No one answered. Sliding into the driver's seat, I started the engine and sat there for a moment, gripping the wheel. My hands were still calloused from years of engine work, but they shook just a little. The cab smelled faintly of grease and coffee, the same as every other late night I'd spent behind this wheel. I adjusted the seat, turned the ignition, and rolled out of the lot. The road was quiet, a strip of asphalt lined with pine trees fading into black. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of tires hitting the seams in the pavement. Every mile pushed me deeper into my own head. I remembered the first time I decided to send money to Lena. She'd just started law school, and her financial aid hadn't cleared. She called me crying, saying she couldn't afford books, maybe even the first semester. I was 23, a specialist just back from deployment, broke myself but willing to pick up double shifts on the motor pool floor. I wired her the money without blinking. She promised she'd pay me back. She never did. The next mile brought Dad's stroke to mind. I was home on leave when it happened. Mom panicked about bills, insurance, the roof leaking. I told her not to worry. I picked up weekend HVAC jobs in Fayetteville, patching units in 100-degree heat until my hands blistered, then drove straight back to base on Sunday nights. I made sure the hospital didn't hound them, made sure Dad had his meds. Nobody at that Thanksgiving table mentioned it. I pressed the gas a little harder, watching the speedometer climb. The headlights stretched ahead, carving out a tunnel of light. I thought about Ainsley, my niece, barely 10 when Lena started leaning on me harder. I had set up a 529 plan under my name because I believed she deserved better than this cycle of pretending. Quiet deposits every month, like clockwork, while Lena bragged about opportunities she supposedly secured. The highway markers flashed by, 30 miles, 40. My chest felt tight, but not from sadness. It was that raw edge between anger and freedom, like peeling off a scab you'd kept covered too long. I pulled into a gas station off I-95, the kind with a flickering neon sign and one clerk slumped behind the counter. I filled the tank, went inside for a bottle of water, and caught my reflection in the freezer door. Tired eyes. Oil still ground into the creases of my hands. Uniform jacket zipped halfway. The face staring back wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. I realized I didn't hate what I saw. I hated how my family had trained me to feel ashamed of it. Back in the truck, I let the engine idle a minute. I thought about the word Lena used, mechanic, like it was an insult. In the Army, being a mechanic meant no one's convoy stalled out. It meant vehicles made it back from the range. It meant the mission didn't die in the mud. Without us, things stopped moving. The irony stung. The same skills that kept battalions rolling weren't even worth a proper introduction at my sister's party. I pulled back onto the highway, the water bottle rolling across the passenger seat. My head drifted to the last time Lena had called me. It was 3 weeks earlier, right before her midterm. "Quinn, can you cover the tuition this semester?" "It's just short term. I'll get on my feet soon." Same script, different year. I wired $2,850 like I always did, telling myself maybe this time she'd appreciate it. At the Thanksgiving table, that gratitude never showed up. The clock on the dash ticked past 1 a.m. I yawned, rubbed my face, and let the rhythm of the road pull me deeper into memory. 15 years of service, and I'd never once missed a payment deadline for them. Car repairs, dental bills, holiday gifts, even groceries some months. I was the quiet backbone. But the longer I drove, the clearer it became. I wasn't a backbone anymore. I was a crutch they'd decided wasn't worth acknowledging. I slowed as the Fort Liberty exit signs appeared. The empty stretch leading to the gate was lined with tall wire fencing and faint floodlights. The guard waved me through, glancing at my ID before snapping a crisp salute. "Welcome back, Chief." The words hit different this time. Respect from a stranger at 2 in the morning. It was more than I'd gotten from people who shared my blood. I parked near the motor pool, the rows of Humvees and trucks looming like quiet soldiers in the dark. I killed the engine and leaned back in the seat. The silence here wasn't heavy. It was solid, grounding. I could almost hear the clank of tools, the voices of my crew joking while they swapped out an axle or bled brakes. They didn't care if I smelled like diesel. They cared that I got results. I climbed out, the cold air sharp against my face, and walked across the lot. My boots crunched on gravel, the sound echoing faintly in the emptiness. The barracks windows glowed in patches, some soldiers still awake, others already knocked out before morning PT. Inside my room, I dropped the keys on the desk and opened the small locker in the corner. The folder I kept there was thicker than the one in my truck. Full bank statements, signed promissory notes, copies of lien agreements. I pulled it out, flipped through the pages, and let the weight of every signature sink in. Page after page told the same story. Quinn Delaney paid. Quinn Delaney covered. Quinn Delaney signed. My handwriting sat on every line where someone else had failed to show up. I felt my jaw tighten. For years, I thought that silence was strength. Tonight, silence was the reason they thought they could erase me. I laid the folder flat on the desk, opened my laptop again, and started drafting something different. Not a rant, not a letter, a plan. In the Army, we called it an OPORD operation order. I typed it at the top of the page. Mission: reclaim my boundaries. Objective: end financial exploitation. Rules of engagement: no arguments, no shouting, no begging. Only facts, documents, and lawful steps. The cursor blinked as I listed tasks. Cancel autopay. Notify institutions. Review lien rights. Notify chain of command for outside employment clearance. Each line made my shoulders loosen just a little. This wasn't anger anymore. It was strategy. I glanced at the clock. Almost 3. My eyes burned, but my pulse stayed steady. For the first time in years, the next move wasn't about rescuing anyone else. It was about pulling my hands back from a fire that had scorched me long enough. The hum of the heater filled the room. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the OPORD draft glowing on the screen, the first clean blueprint I'd written for myself in over a decade. I pushed the chair back and rubbed my temples, the glow of the screen steady in the dark room. The word OPORD at the top of the page looked almost official, the way it had 100 times in training briefs, except this one wasn't about a convoy route or an equipment inspection. This was about my family. If the Army had taught me anything, it was that a plan without structure fell apart the second it met resistance. I started with the basics. Mission: end all financial support to Lena and my parents that wasn't backed by accountability. Simple, clear, and non-negotiable. Next came the situation. Current exploitation level, high. Resources, my savings, my company Delaney Field Services, and the Delaney Capital Trust account tied to the condo. Enemy forces, Lena's manipulation, Mom's guilt trips, and the family's silence. Friendly forces, none. I almost laughed when I typed that. For once, I didn't have a squad behind me. Then the execution. This was where things got sharp. Task 1. Pull the plug on autopay for the mortgage. That lien was filed under the trust, which gave me every right to terminate payments. Task 2. Notify the 529 plan administrator about discontinuing Ainsley's account effective the next semester, so it couldn't be twisted into cruelty. Task 3. Detach my business from any ties to Noah Whitaker's contracts. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just a clean exit from anything that gave Lena leverage. The service and support section read like a to-do list. Call bank officer. Draft certified letters. Log communication for record keeping. No more casual texts or calls where they could claim I'd promised something. This time, it was all documented. Finally, the command and signal. That one was easy. Command, me. Signal, silence. I wouldn't waste another word in a shouting match. The documents and the bank statements would do the talking. I stared at the screen, the bullet points lined up like troops on a parade field. I'd written hundreds of OPORDs in my career, but this one carried a weight none of the others had. This wasn't just about readiness or logistics. It was about taking background I'd given up without a fight for far too long. Before hitting save, I opened another document, ROE Rules of Engagement. I typed slowly, making each point count. No yelling, no insults, no late-night phone calls. Every interaction backed by paperwork. No exceptions. If Lena cried, if Mom begged, if anyone tried to twist the story, I wouldn't bend. The Army drilled it into us. Stick to the ROE, or you lose control of the mission. I leaned back, feeling the stiffness in my shoulders. The room smelled faintly of oil from the jacket I'd tossed over the chair. I pulled it closer, checked the pocket, and found the folded approval form I'd been meaning to finish. Outside employment authorization. Every soldier who ran a side business had to file one, and mine listed Delaney Field Services as a small repair operation. I'd always been honest about it, but this week I updated it with a new note. No direct family financial involvement. It wasn't required, but I wanted it on record. If the Inspector General ever asked, I could point to that form and show that I hadn't blurred lines between my Army duty and my family drama. Transparency wasn't just a buzzword here, it was armor. I filled out the last box, signed, scanned, and emailed it to Major Holloway, my commanding officer. His reply came 20 minutes later, short and to the point. Approved. Proud of your professionalism, Chief. I exhaled, surprised at how much that line steadied me. Holloway had seen soldiers crash under family pressure before. By approving this, he knew exactly what I was doing. The clock on my laptop clicked past 4 a.m., but the adrenaline kept me sharp. I opened my banking portal again and scrolled through Lena's account. Payment history after payment history glared back. I hit the export button and downloaded the entire 5-year record. $97,000 wasn't just a number now, it was a report. I dropped it into a folder labeled Exhibit A. Next came the lien agreement on the condo. The paperwork showed Delaney Capital Trust as the financial guarantor. Without those payments, foreclosure was inevitable unless Lena took over. I saved it as Exhibit B. Then the promissory notes. Every time Lena swore she'd pay me back, she'd sign something I'd tucked away in case she forgot. Most were short one-page documents, but together they added up to a mountain of proof. I scanned them, filed them as Exhibit C. By the time I was done, the folder on my desktop looked like a trial binder. Exhibits lined up, dates clear, signatures undeniable. No more room for "I didn't know" or "she exaggerated." End of 20. The room was silent except for the hum of the heater. I pulled the chair closer, cracked my knuckles, and kept going. If they wanted to pretend I was just the Army mechanic, I'd lean into it. Mechanics didn't scream for credit, they fixed what was broken. And in this case, what was broken was the idea that I could be used without consequence. I clicked open a blank email draft, started typing to the mortgage officer, "Please terminate automatic payments from Delaney Capital Trust effective immediately." I didn't send it yet. but the words looked right on the screen. Calm, professional, final. I drafted another note to the 529 plan administrator. Effective next semester, please discontinue contributions for Ainsley Caldwell. Notice provided within required timeline. Again, unsent but ready. The last one took longer. A message to my business partner flagging the potential conflict with Noah's firm. Per compliance review, recommend we withdraw from pending contracts. No drama, no finger pointing, just business. I saved the drafts in a folder marked pending actions. Tomorrow, or technically later today, I'd send them all. For now, the plan was in place. I stretched, my joints popping from hours in the chair. My eyes burned, but my chest felt lighter. The OPORD glowed on the screen, the ROE listed in bold, the exhibits lined up like ammunition, everything ready, everything clear. I shut the laptop halfway, leaving the light spilling out onto the desk. The silence of the room pressed close, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. It felt like control. I pushed the laptop open again and hovered over the drafts I'd written hours earlier. The cursor blinked like it was waiting for me to stop thinking and just commit. I clicked into the first email to the mortgage officer, read it one more time, and hit send. No dramatic music, no hesitation once my finger touched the trackpad. Just a soft whoosh as the message left my outbox. The sound felt heavier than it should have, like the first domino tipping over. The auto-pay system had been feeding Lena's mortgage for almost 4 years, covering the bulk of her monthly payment through Delaney Capital Trust. Without it, she'd have to start paying on her own. I leaned back and pictured her opening that bank notice confused at first, then panicked when the math didn't add up. For once, the gap wouldn't be filled quietly by me. Next, I clicked into the 529 plan drive aft. This one was harder, not because I doubted the choice, but because of Ainsley. She didn't deserve to be caught in the middle, but the account had become another invisible leash. I read through the terms one more time. Notice required before the next semester. Funds could remain frozen until reassigned. Everything above board. I typed the date, added my signature, and hit send. The email looked almost cold. Effective fall semester. Discontinue automatic contributions to account XXX for beneficiary Ainsley Caldwell. But cold was better than open-ended generosity that nobody respected. I reminded myself that Ainsley would still have other scholarship opportunities. I wasn't cutting her off from education. I was cutting off Lena's ability to brag about money she hadn't earned. Finally, I opened the draft to my business partner, Matt. Our company had been exploring contracts tied to an infrastructure project where Noah Whitaker, assistant district attorney and Lena's golden boy boyfriend, had a role. It wasn't a big deal yet, but it was leverage Lena liked to flash at parties. I wasn't about to let my company's name be dragged into that circus. I kept the message short. Per compliance. Recommend withdrawal from LTE infrastructure negotiations. Potential conflict of interest identified. No drama, no detail. Just clean separation. I clicked send. That one gave me an odd sense of relief. Cutting ties before anyone could accuse me of playing favorites meant no one could weaponize my name against me. I sat back, the room quiet again except for the soft hum of the heater. The 3 messages sat in my sent folder like sealed doors behind me. Mortgage autopay, done. 529. Plan, done. Business ties, cut. In less than 10 minutes, I'd erased years of open lines they'd treated as permanent. I stood up and walked to the small cabinet in the corner. Inside was a shoebox where I kept the oldest receipts, yellowed slips from HVAC jobs, wire transfer confirmations, even a handwritten note from Lena back in college promising to repay every cent. I picked it up, thumbed the fading ink, and almost laughed. She probably hadn't thought I'd keep it, but I had. Every scrap of paper was part of a trail they couldn't argue against now. I set the note back, closed the box, and leaned against the cabinet. My chest felt strange, lighter, but also raw, like peeling off gear after a 12-hour shift and feeling every bruise you'd been ignoring. The base outside was still asleep. A faint hum of generators, the occasional truck in the distance, but nothing loud. I walked back to the desk, poured another glass of water, and pulled out my phone. No missed calls yet. They wouldn't know anything had changed until the first notice hit. The silence gave me space to breathe. I flipped open the laptop again, this time pulling up a clean spreadsheet. At the top, I typed Operation Boundary. One column for action taken, one for date, one for follow-up. Auto pay canceled check. 529, plan discontinued check. Contract withdrawal check. Under status, I wrote, complete. The Army had drilled accountability into me. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. This wasn't about paranoia, it was about control. And after years of letting my family pull strings without consequence, I was finally cutting every one of them clean. I leaned back in the chair, watching the clock tick toward dawn. My phone buzzed once, a text from Matt confirming he'd seen the withdrawal notice. Good call. Keeps us clean. Short, simple, no questions asked. That was the kind of partnership I respected. The next buzz came an hour later, this time from the bank. Confirmation that the autopay cancellation had been processed. The wording was sterile, just a notice of change in recurring payments. But reading it, I felt the shift settle into place. A 4-figure obligation that had once been mine was now back on Lena. I shut my eyes for a moment, listening to the heater rattle. My body was tired, but my mind felt wired, sharper than it had in months. The plan wasn't theory anymore, it was moving. The Army mechanic had done the job, and this time, the job was my own life. I stood, stretched, and walked to the window. The early light was bleeding into the horizon, painting the base in pale gray. Soldiers would be waking up soon for PT, heading out into the cold with their rucks. I watched the first group jog past, their cadence echoing faintly. There was something steady in that sound, a reminder that outside the mess of family drama, my world still ran on structure and purpose. I wasn't just someone's wallet or a punchline at a party. I was Chief Warrant Officer Quinn Delaney, and I'd just taken back $97,000 of ground I should never have lost. The phone buzzed again. Not Matt this time, not the bank. A voicemail notification lit up the screen. My mother. I didn't press play. Not yet. Instead, I set the phone face down on the desk and poured another glass of water. The night had been long enough already. I left the phone face down on the desk and walked to the sink, the glass of water still cold in my hand. When I came back, the screen glowed again, 3 more missed calls from Mom and now one from Dad. I ignored them all. Ignoring calls had never been my habit, but I knew exactly what was behind those rings. It wasn't concern, it was panic. By late afternoon, the knock on my door wasn't a surprise. I glanced through the peephole and saw them both standing there, Dad stiff in his old windbreaker, Mom clutching the same handbag she dragged to every serious talk. I pressed the latch and let them in. Neither waited for an invitation. Mom's voice started before her coat was even off. Quinn, what on earth are you doing? Ainsley's school called this morning. They said her scholarship funding has been discontinued. Lena's in tears. And now the bank is saying the mortgage autopay has been stopped. Do you know how humiliating this is? I closed the door, leaned against it, and let her words spill out. Dad stayed quiet at first, his jaw set, eyes sharp. The air in the room thickened with that heavy mix of accusation and disappointment. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said evenly. You can't just abandon your family like this, Mom shot back. That little girl, your niece, she doesn't understand why her tuition money is suddenly gone. You've always been the dependable one. What happened to you? I crossed the room slowly, pulled the folder of exhibits off the desk, and set it down on the coffee table. What happened? I said, opening to the first page. Is that I got tired of being used. You see this? I tapped the bank statement with nearly 5 years of transfers highlighted. That's $97,000 I've paid to keep Lena afloat. Tuition, mortgage, car repairs, medical bills, all from me. Mom blinked, then looked away. Dad leaned forward, squinting at the numbers. I didn't know it was that much. Of course you didn't, I said. Because I never threw it in anyone's face. I just paid it. But Saturday night, at that Thanksgiving table, your daughter, my sister, stood there and mocked me in front of her friends, and you told me not to make a scene. That was the only thing you had to say. Mom's lips tightened. She didn't mean it like that. She was nervous with her in-laws there. You know how she gets. I almost laughed. Nervous? She called me the Army mechanic like I was some stray she didn't want in the picture. I've spent my career keeping convoys moving, engines running, soldiers safe. But to her, I'm a joke. And you let her do it. Dad finally spoke, his voice low but firm. Is this true, Martha? She called her that? Mom hesitated, then said, It was just a comment. People joke. No, I cut in. People joke with love. That was contempt. And it wasn't the first time. Every party, every gathering, I get treated like the help, while the help I actually gave gets buried. Mom tried again. But you can't just cut her off completely. She's drowning without you. Don't you care what happens to her? I pointed at the papers. Of course I care. That's why I covered her for years. But care without boundaries is just enabling. She's 30 years old, Mom. She has a law degree. She has a husband who works. If she's still drowning, it's because she never learned to swim without someone else holding her up. Dad's expression softened, though he didn't side with me yet. He studied the promissory notes, Lena's signature scrawled across each one. You kept all these? Yes, because I thought someday, if she ever denied it, I'd need proof. And here we are. Mom's voice cracked now, frustration bleeding into desperation. But Quinn, think about the bigger picture. Family doesn't keep score. Family sacrifices for each other. I snapped the folder shut, the sound echoing in the room. Don't you dare talk to me about sacrifice. I've sacrificed every year since I dropped out of college to take care of Dad after his stroke. I sacrificed weekends, paychecks, nights of sleep. I didn't keep score, Mom. You did by erasing me the second I didn't fit your idea of respectability. The room went quiet except for the hum of the heater. Dad looked at me with something I couldn't quite read. Maybe regret. Maybe recognition. Mom sat down on the edge of the couch, clutching her handbag like it might hold a solution. You're angry, she said softly now. You're hurt. I understand. But this isn't the way to fix it. This isn't about fixing it, I said, my voice calm again. This is about ending it. I'm not yelling. I'm not threatening. I'm just done. Done paying for people who mock me. Done covering bills that aren't mine. Done being told to sit quietly while my worth gets erased. Dad cleared his throat. What about Ainsley? She's just a kid. I nodded. She island. And that's why I gave notice to the school with time for them to find another scholarship. She won't be thrown out mid-semester. She'll have options. What she won't have is a secret fund that lets her mother keep pretending she's self-made. Mom's eyes welled, but no tears fell. She looked at Dad, maybe hoping for backup, but he stayed still, arms crossed now. The silence stretched until it was clear she wasn't going to win this argument. You think you're teaching us a lesson, she said finally. No, I corrected. I'm teaching myself one. That it's okay to stop when giving turns into being used. That it's okay to draw a line when family forgets what family means. She stood, smoothing her coat, her face hardening again. You'll regret this someday. I stayed seated. Maybe, but I'd regret more if I kept letting you erase me. Dad rose slowly, placing a hand on her shoulder. Let's go, Martha. They walked to the door. Mom didn't look back. Dad gave me one last glance, his brow furrowed but his eyes softer than hers. Then they were gone, the door clicking shut behind them. I sat in the quiet, the folder still on the table, my phone buzzing again with another missed call from Lena this time. I didn't touch it. The documents in front of me said more than any conversation ever could. I stayed in the chair long after the door shut, the silence stretching through the room like a heavy fog. The folder was still on the table, its edges sharp under the lamplight, but I didn't reach for it again. Instead, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the weight of everything sit on me at once. Sleep wasn't coming, not after a confrontation like that. I got up and paced, the floor creaking under my boots. My mind flicked back through years of choices I hadn't thought about in a long time. Dropping out of college wasn't in my plan. I'd been halfway through a mechanical engineering degree when Dad's first stroke hit. Mom panicked. Lena was still in high school, and someone had to keep the household from collapsing. That someone was me. I remembered walking into the motor pool on base for the first time, grease under my fingernails from the part-time shop job I'd held during school. The sergeant in charge handed me a wrench and said, "You keep it moving, soldier, or the whole damn convoy stops." That was the first time I realized my hands could carry weight that books couldn't. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. The memories lined up one after another, each carrying its own sting. The time I sold my truck to cover Dad's hospital bill. The weekends I pulled double shifts fixing HVAC units around Fayetteville to pay Lena's first-year tuition deposit. The birthdays I skipped, the holidays I worked through, because bills didn't stop just because it was Christmas. I poured another glass of water and leaned against the counter, staring out the window. Somewhere out there, Lena was probably asleep in that house, still believing things would magically work out. She had no idea the auto-pay lifeline was gone, no clue the scholarship fund had been cut. That ignorance was its own luxury, bought and paid for by me. The thought didn't bring me satisfaction. It brought a hollow ache. I'd carried the weight willingly, and in return, I'd been reduced to a punchline in front of people who'd never worked a day in grease or sweat. I turned away from the window, restless, and pulled open the cabinet again. The shoebox of receipts sat where I'd left it. I carried it to the table, lifted the lid, and sifted through the slips of paper. Some were so faded they were barely legible, but each one had been a lifeline at the time. One in particular caught me. A promissory note Lena had signed during law school. The handwriting was rushed, her signature barely holding form. "I promise to repay $2,500 by August," it read. I traced the letters with my thumb, remembering the night she'd written it. She was desperate, crying, swearing she'd make it right when she graduated. I'd believed her. I set the note down and stared at it until my chest tightened. Then I reached for the lighter in the drawer. The flame flickered, and I touched it to the corner of the paper. The edges curled, blackened, and folded into ash in the sink. I watched it burn all the way down. The smoke sharpened my nose. It wasn't about erasing the debt. It was about releasing the grip it had on me. For years, those scraps of paper had chained me to hope. Hope she'd change, hope she'd see me. But tonight, that chain broke. The room smelled faintly of burnt paper. I rinsed the ashes down the drain and splashed water on my face. My reflection in the mirror above the sink looked older than I remembered. Not broken, just worn. Like one of the Humvees I'd patched a dozen times, still running but carrying scars in every bolt. I sat back down at the desk, opened the laptop again, and stared at the OPORD. The plan was clear. The actions were underway. But what I hadn't accounted for was the space left behind when you finally stop carrying someone else. It felt strange, like stepping off a ruck march and realizing your shoulders are lighter but your muscles are still braced for weight. I closed the laptop and leaned back, eyes drifting to the ceiling. The barracks around me were quiet, most soldiers asleep before morning PT. Somewhere in another room I could hear muffled snores, the creak of a bed frame. Life moved on outside my head, steady and routine. I thought about Lena's voice again, the way she'd said it, "Who let the army mechanic in?" The words replayed on a loop, sharper each time. I'd been called worse in the army, teased by guys who didn't think women could handle wrenches or engines. But those jabs had rolled off me, because at the end of the day, I proved them wrong with every repair finished, every vehicle mission ready. From my sister, though, it landed different. She knew exactly what I'd done. She'd leaned on it for years. And still, in a room full of people, she'd chosen to erase it. The clock ticked past 2, then 3. I didn't even bother trying to lie down. Sleep wasn't an option. Instead, I pulled a notepad from the drawer and started writing. Not a plan this time, not exhibits or orders, just a list of every major sacrifice I could remember. Tuition, $48,000 over 5 years. Mortgage, $36,000. Medical bills, $9,000. Miscellaneous groceries, car repairs, books, another $4,000. The numbers lined up until the total matched what I already knew, 97 grand. I circled it and sat back, staring at the figure. Seeing it in my handwriting drove the point deeper. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't exaggerating. I'd been the invisible support beam holding up a house that pretended I didn't exist. The pen tapped against the paper, steady as a metronome. My chest finally loosened. Writing it out was like pulling air after holding your breath too long. The heater clicked off, leaving the room even quieter. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, and let the silence settle. My body was exhausted, but my mind was clear. I wasn't chasing their gratitude anymore. I wasn't waiting for a thank you note that would never come. I was finished carrying that weight. The first hint of dawn crept through the blinds. I stood, stretched, and walked to the window. The sky was pale gray, the kind of morning that promised nothing fancy but still came without asking. Soldiers jogged past again, their cadence echoing faintly. Their rhythm was steady, predictable, reliable. Exactly what family was supposed to be. I pressed a hand against the glass, feeling the cold seep into my palm. The thought hit me plain. If I wanted that kind of steady, I had to stop expecting it from people who had no idea what it meant. I left the notepad on the desk, circled numbers still staring back, and pulled a clean shirt over my head. The morning had started like any other on base, but I knew it wasn't going to stay that way. The phone hadn't stopped buzzing, texts from Lena, voicemails from Mom, even a short one from Noah asking if I'd thought this through. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I slid the folder of exhibits into my tote, zipped it closed, and walked out the door. By the time I drove into Jacksonville, my stomach felt like a coil of wire. Uncle David's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a sprawling two-story where the family always gathered for holidays. Today, it looked like a stage waiting for a play I'd already rehearsed. Cars lined the driveway. Voices floated from the backyard where a white canopy had been set up. I parked down the street, sat for a moment, and breathed in through my nose. No rage, no shaking hands, just steady focus. Then I grabbed the tote and walked through the side gate. Conversations buzzed, cousins trading updates about jobs, aunts comparing prescriptions, someone complaining about gas prices. A few glanced up when they saw me but quickly looked away, like acknowledging me was suddenly complicated. Lena stood by the drink table, a glass of wine in hand, wearing a beige dress I recognized because I'd paid for it years ago as a graduation gift. The earrings sparkling in her ears had been mine too, a present from a deployment bonus I'd blown on her. She froze when she spotted me, then plastered on a smile. "Quinn, you made it. I thought you'd be too busy." I didn't bother replying. Instead, I stepped forward and raised my voice just enough to carry across the tables. "Can I have everyone's attention for a moment?" The chatter dimmed, heads turned. Some looked curious, others uneasy. I placed the tote on the main table, unzipped it, and pulled out the first set of papers. "I know a lot of you have heard things about what's been happening in this family," I began, voice steady. "So let me clear it up with facts." I held up the first document. "This is a bank statement. Over the past 5 years, I've transferred a total of $97,420 to Lena's accounts. Tuition, mortgage, repairs, bills, every line is here." I laid the statement flat on the table and pulled out the next. "This is the lien agreement for the house Lena lives in. Without Delaney Capital Trust underwriting it, the mortgage wouldn't have been approved. The payments, covered by me, until yesterday." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lena's face flushed red. I flipped to the promissory notes. "These are Lena's signatures on agreements to repay funds. Not one has ever been honored. Not a dollar returned." I set them down and looked directly at her. "And yet at Thanksgiving, when I walked into the house I helped pay for, you introduced me as the Army mechanic, not as your sister, not as the one who kept you afloat, just the mechanic." Lena's mouth opened, but no words came. Her eyes darted around, searching for someone to back her up. No one spoke. I scanned the room. I've spent 15 years in the Army. I've turned wrenches on Humvees in the desert, kept convoys moving under fire, trained younger soldiers who trusted me with their lives. I've patched vehicles that carried your brothers, your cousins, your neighbors. But in this family, that work doesn't even earn me a name. It earns me a punchline. The silence was heavier now, the kind that made people shift in their seats. I let it hang for a moment before continuing. "When Dad needed hospital bills covered, I paid. When Mom needed dental work, I paid. When Ainsley needed a scholarship, I created one. Not once did I ask for recognition. I thought being family meant that went without saying. But Saturday proved me wrong. So I'm saying it now, in front of all of you, because I refuse to be erased any longer." Lena's hand trembled around her wine glass. Finally, she spoke, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean it like that. I wanted everything to look perfect in front of Noah's parents. I didn't want them to think we were dependent," I cut in, "because that's exactly what you are. Dependent on me, and you covered it up by turning me into the outsider." Her lips pressed tight, eyes shining. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I shook my head. "I don't need your apology, I need the truth out in the open. And now at Island." I gathered the papers back into the folder and closed it. The room stayed quiet, no one rushing to defend her, no one jumping in to scold me. Even Mom, sitting stiff in a corner chair, kept her eyes on her lap. I took one last look around. Family isn't about bleeding one person dry while pretending they don't exist. It isn't about silencing someone to protect an image. It's about respect. And if that's missing, then so is the family. With that, I slid the folder back into my tote and stepped away from the table. No one blocked me, no one tried to argue. The canopy full of relatives felt smaller than it ever had, as if the weight of truth had taken up every inch of space. I walked back out the side gate, the tote heavy at my side but my shoulders lighter than they'd been in years. I hadn't made it halfway to my truck when I heard my dad's voice behind me. "Quinn, wait." I stopped, turned, and saw him weaving through the crowd. His shoulders were squared, but his face carried something I hadn't seen in years: resolve, not judgment. He caught up to me just past the gate, his breath visible in the cool air. "You should have let me see those papers earlier," he said quietly. "I thought your mother and I were helping Lena. I had no idea it was you." I searched his eyes, trying to read whether this was pity or truth. For once, it felt like truth. I didn't bring it up because I didn't think I had to. I thought family would notice. Instead, he nodded slowly, glancing back toward the house where murmurs were starting again under the canopy. "You're right. We should have noticed." The gate creaked as it opened again. Mom stood there face tight, Lena a step behind her with red eyes and blotchy cheeks. The sight might have moved me once. Tonight, it didn't. "Quinn," Mom began, her tone clipped. "What you just did was unnecessary. Airing private matters in front of everyone? You've humiliated your sister. Vriend." Dad cut her off before I could. "No, Martha, she told the truth. That's all she did." Mom's eyes widened, not expecting him to take my side. "Gerald, don't." "I've kept quiet long enough," he said, voice low but steady. I watched Quinn walk away from her own education to take care of me. I watched her work nights, weekends, deployments, always sending money, always showing up. And we let Lena stand there and call her a mechanic like it was something to be ashamed of. If anyone's been humiliated, it's her. The words hit harder than I expected. I'd spent so many years bracing for his silence that hearing him finally speak felt almost disorienting. Mom faltered, clutched her bag tighter, and turned to Lena. "Tell her you didn't mean it." Lena's chin trembled. "I didn't," she whispered. I wanted to look good in front of Noah's parents. I didn't want them to think we relied on anyone else." I stared at her. "But you did rely on me. For nearly $100,000 worth of rely. And instead of owning that, you erased me." Tears slipped down her face, but I didn't move closer. For years, I'd been the one to comfort her when she cried, to pick her back up. Tonight, I stayed still. Dad put a hand on my shoulder, the weight of it solid and grounding. "You don't owe them anything more, Quinn. Not money, not silence." Mom's voice sharpened. "So that's it? We just let this family fall apart because she's angry?" "No," I said, stepping past the gate, tote slung against my hip. "It's falling apart because you mistook silence for consent. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done." The yard behind them buzzed with whispers, cousins pretending not to stare but listening to every word. I didn't care. Let them hear. Let them finally understand that the so-called army mechanic wasn't just a background character. Dad didn't stop me this time. He let his hand fall, nodded once, and stayed standing between me and the two women who had spent years draining me dry. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in it. I reached my truck, tossed the tote onto the passenger seat, and slid in behind the wheel. The canopy lights blurred in the rearview mirror, voices carrying faintly but without detail. My chest felt raw but lighter, the way it does after a hard run when your lungs still ache but the weight has lifted. The drive back to base was quiet. No music, no distractions. Just the steady hum of the engine I'd tuned myself the month before. Every mile put more distance between me and the canopy, between me and the version of myself that had accepted being erased. By the time I pulled through the Fort Liberty gate, the guard gave the same nod, and, "Welcome back, Chief." This time, I didn't just hear it, I believed it. Inside my room, I set the tote on the desk and unzipped it again. The folder of exhibits sat neatly inside, every page still in place. But I didn't feel the same sharp anger looking at them now. I felt steady. They weren't weapons anymore. They were records, Proof that I hadn't imagined the years of sacrifice. Proof that I'd finally chosen to stop. The heater clicked on, filling the silence with a low hum. I sat down, poured myself another glass of water, and let the quiet stretch. For once, it wasn't the kind of silence that pressed on me. It was the kind that left room to breathe. My phone buzzed again, another message from Lena. Please don't let this ruin us. I didn't mean it. I'll fix it. Just don't cut me off. I didn't reply, not because I wanted to punish her, but because the words had no weight anymore. Promises from her had always been empty, and I wasn't about to pretend this time was different. I set the phone down, leaned back in the chair, and closed my eyes. My dad's words echoed in my head. You don't owe them anything more. For the first time in years, I let myself believe it. The first bank notice landed faster than I expected. 3 days after the autopay shut off, Lena's name popped up on my phone in a string of texts. Did you cancel the payments? The bank says I'm late. This has to be a mistake. Call me back right now. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She'd figure it out soon enough when the next statement arrived. By the end of the week, Mom left another voicemail, her voice sharp with panic. Quinn, your sister's house is at risk. The mortgage company sent a warning about foreclosure. Do you want her and Ainsley out on the street? How could you do this to your own blood? I sat in my office at Delaney Field Services, the hum of the HVAC units outside the window filling the silence between messages. I didn't save the voicemail. I didn't delete it either. I just let it sit there, proof that the second the money dried up, their memory of me suddenly sharpened. The fallout spread fast. One of my cousins, the kind who always bragged about Lena being the successful one, called me out of the blue. What's going on with you two? Lena says you're punishing her. Is that true? I kept my voice flat. I'm not punishing her, I'm stopping the free ride. He stammered something about family unity, then hung up. Funny how unity only mattered when money was involved. Noah entered the picture next. He sent a formal email to my company account, not personal, not even friendly. Miss Delaney, I understand Delaney Field Services has chosen to withdraw from pending negotiations with LTE Infrastructure. Could you clarify if this decision is final? I typed back one line. It is final. A week later, word got around that Noah had stepped away from the project altogether. A contact at Street Mary's Hospital confirmed it casually over coffee. Yeah. Apparently questions came up about his connections, didn't look good. He backed out before it tanked his credibility. Nut. That one hit me with a mix of relief and grim satisfaction. Lena had paraded him around like her golden ticket. Without that shine, she didn't just lose money, she lost face. Meanwhile, relatives who once praised her couldn't hide the shift. An aunt from Dallas canceled Lena's speaking slot at a community event. A cousin in Raleigh, who'd always boasted about Lena's law degree, muttered something about her poor choices when I ran into him at the gas station. The whispers spread, subtle but steady, the way cracks creep through drywall. Back at her house, foreclosure notices started stacking up. One evening, after a long day in the motor pool, I drove past out of curiosity. The yard lights were off, blinds drawn. A final notice envelope was stuck in the screen door. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just drove past, the truck's headlights cutting across the sign like a spotlight. Inside me, there wasn't triumph. There wasn't gloating. Just confirmation. For years, I'd been the patch keeping her house from falling apart. Without me, the structure showed its real strength or lack of it. At the office, my assistant Olivia walked in one morning holding a printout. Boss, you should see this. It was a local news piece about home foreclosures rising in the county. Buried halfway down, a line read, "One property linked to attorney Lena Caldwell faces repossession after payment disruptions." No names beyond hers, no mention of me. But the implication was clear. She was no longer bulletproof. Olivia glanced at me. You okay? I shrugged. Better than I've been in years. She didn't push. She'd been around long enough to know the difference between quiet anger and quiet relief. That weekend, another family gathering rolled around, smaller this time, just cousins and aunts. I didn't go. I didn't need to. Word trickled back anyway. Someone told me Lena showed up late, avoided eye contact, and left before dessert. No more boasting, no more spotlight, just silence. The same week, I got an email from Ainsley's school principal. Dear Miss Delaney, we wanted to inform you that without continued support, Ainsley Caldwell will need alternative funding options for next semester. We're exploring other scholarships and will keep the family informed. I stared at the email for a long time. Ainsley didn't deserve to suffer for her mother's choices, but I couldn't be the silent lifeline anymore. The responsibility belonged to Lena. For once, the system would force her to step up instead of leaning on me. The hardest part came when Dad called. His voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since his stroke. Quinn, your mother's upset. Lena's drowning. She keeps calling us in the middle of the night. I don't know what to do. I held the phone tighter. You let her figure it out, Dad. The same way I had to figure out how to pay bills when I was 23. She's 30. She'll manage. There was a pause. Then he said, I wish we'd done better by you. That sentence stayed with me longer than any threat, any guilt trip. For once, I heard regret instead of denial. At work, life moved on. Trucks came in needing repairs, soldiers brought in busted generators, Olivia kept the office running. My crew treated me the same as always, Chief Delaney, the one who got things done. No one there cared about family drama or mortgages. They cared about results. The contrast was almost laughable. In one world, I was a punchline. In another, I was respected without question. It made me realize how warped my family lens had become. I'd been measuring my worth by people who refused to see it, instead of by the people who did. The following Monday, another voicemail came from Mom. This one wasn't sharp. It was tired. Quinn, I don't know what to say anymore. Your sister's house is slipping away. Ainsley might lose her spot at school. We can't fix this without you. Please reconsider. I didn't call back. I didn't even save the message. I hit delete and sat back in my chair. Through the office window, I could see one of our trucks pulling out of the lot, freshly serviced and ready. It struck me how simple it was here. Identify the problem, fix it, send it back stronger. Family should have been that way too. But it wasn't. Not with them. And I finally stopped expecting it to be. The envelope showed up on a Saturday morning, tucked between a utility bill and a coupon flyer. Plain ivory, my full name written across the front in handwriting I knew too well. Martha Delaney. My mother hadn't written me anything in years. She preferred voicemails, usually long and guilt-heavy. But this was different. I carried it inside and set it on the desk. For hours, I didn't touch it. I brewed coffee, checked my email, even walked through the motor pool to check on a truck waiting for parts. Every time I came back, the envelope sat there, a silent wait. Finally, late that night when the office had emptied, I slid it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, her handwriting neat and careful. Quinn, I'm not writing to scold you, I'm not writing to beg either. I just want to say I miss you. The house feels quiet without your voice. I walk past your old room and remember you staying up late with flashcards for Lena. I think about how you rushed home to make sure your father took his pills. Maybe I was too focused on protecting Lena's image to see what I was doing to you. I admit I was wrong. I hope someday you'll forgive me. If you can't, I'll understand. But if there's even a small corner left in your heart for me, I hope you'll open it. Love, Mom. I set the paper down, my fingers resting on the edge. It didn't feel like the kind of letter she would have written if Lena had drafted it for her. There were no excuses, no manipulations, no veiled threats. Just plain words from a woman who finally realized she'd lost her daughter. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the page. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with the dull ache of something breaking years too late. I thought about every voicemail she'd left, every time she'd defended Lena instead of me, every moment she chose silence when I was erased. And yet, in this letter, she sounded smaller, human. I carried it to the break room, pulled open the drawer, and grabbed a lighter. The flame caught fast, curling the edges of the paper, blackening the neat letters. I held it over the sink until nothing remained but gray ash. The smoke curled up, sharp in my nose, and then it was gone. It wasn't spite. It wasn't vengeance. It was closure. I didn't need that letter sitting around like a relic of what might have been. I forgave her in that moment, but forgiveness didn't mean going back. The next day, another voicemail came through. Her voice was softer this time. I know you got my letter. I hope you understand I meant every word. I don't expect you to call back, I just wanted you to know. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Burning the letter wasn't about rejecting her. It was about finally letting go of the hope that someday she'd change enough to make me feel like I belonged. At the office, Olivia noticed the difference. You seem lighter, she said, handing me a file. Maybe I am, I replied. Finally stopped carrying weight that wasn't mine. She smiled faintly, not pressing for details. That was one thing I valued about my crew. They respected silence when it mattered. Later that week, I drove past Mom and Dad's house. The curtains were drawn, the yard neat but quiet. For a moment, I thought about stopping, about walking in and saying something simple. But I didn't. Instead, I parked a block away and sat there, hands on the wheel, remembering every night I'd pulled into that driveway with groceries, medical supplies, cash in hand. It used to feel like duty. Now it felt like history. I rolled the window down, let the cool air in, then started the truck and drove on. 2 days later, another message appeared, this time from Lena. Not a voicemail, not a text. A handwritten note shoved into my office mailbox, scrawled on cheap stationery. Quinn, I know Mom reached out to you. I know she wrote you a letter. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I have to try. I was wrong. I said things I can't take back. I should have been proud of you. I should have told people what you did for me instead of hiding it. I don't expect you to fix anything now. I just hope one day you'll remember I was still your sister. The words looked shaky, smudged like she'd cried while writing. I read it once, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the same folder that held the exhibits. Not because I needed to hold on to it, but because evidence wasn't always about transactions. Sometimes, it was about moments that proved the story wasn't as one-sided as it once felt. I didn't burn Lena's note, but I didn't respond either. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the constant pull of obligation dragging me awake. The phone stayed silent, and I didn't dread the sound of it ringing. My mind replayed the words from Mom's letter. If there's even a small corner left in your heart for me. There was. But that corner wasn't for her anymore. It was for me. I pulled the blanket tighter, let the silence settle, and breathed in the rare calm of a night without weight pressing on my chest. For once, I didn't dream about bills or repairs or family drama. I just slept. The morning after I burned Mom's letter, I sat in the office with a cup of black coffee and stared at the framed photo hanging by my desk. It was one of the few I'd kept. Me in uniform, grease smeared on my face after a convoy repair in Kuwait, a couple of young soldiers grinning behind me, proud that we'd gotten the trucks moving again. That photo reminded me where my real family was among people who respected sweat and skill, not empty titles. The phone buzzed with another message from Lena. I didn't even open it. Instead, I opened a fresh browser tab and typed, Nonprofit Foundation Application. The idea had been gnawing at me for weeks, ever since I pulled Ainsley's scholarship funding. If I was going to give again, it wouldn't be in the shadows. It wouldn't be a secret lifeline for people who erased me. It would be something transparent, structured, untouchable. I filled in the form line by line. Delaney Foundation for Technical Girls. Mission: to provide scholarships and mentorship for young women entering technical trades in mechanical fields. Not law school, not politics, not prestige fields where skill mattered more than image. I listed the seed funding I was prepared to allocate. Not millions, but enough to cover several scholarships annually without bleeding my business dry. Enough to make an actual dent. When the form asked for a founding story, I typed with a steady hand, created by Chief Warrant Officer Quinn Delaney, who believes no girl should be underestimated because her hands are stained with grease. And 40. When I hit submit, the confirmation page popped up with a simple line, Application received. I leaned back, let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and felt something shift inside me. This wasn't revenge anymore, this was rebuilding. Olivia peeked in a few minutes later, tablet in hand. Paperwork mountain waiting for you. But, what was that I saw on your screen? I told her. For the first time, I said it out loud. I'm starting a foundation. What? She blinked, then broke into a grin. About damn time. You've been funding everyone else's dreams for years. Might as well fund the right ones. We spent the afternoon sketching out logistics, application criteria, partner schools, public announcement. I made it clear. Every scholarship recipient would be vetted, documented, and recognized. No more anonymous handouts. No one would ever again rewrite the story of where the money came from. By the end of the week, I had attorneys drafting bylaws, accountants creating a transparent ledger, and a small website live with a single banner, building futures, one wrench at a time. The first emails started trickling in almost immediately. Teachers from trade schools, parents of girls who wanted to be welders, mechanics, engineers. They weren't polished requests full of flattery. They were blunt, honest. My daughter's the only girl in her auto shop class, and she doesn't want to quit. We can't afford the tools she needs. She's got the grades, just not the money. I read every one. I recognized myself in them, the kid who had chosen grease-stained hands over a diploma wall and paid for it in silence. When I selected the first 3 recipients, I made sure the news went public. Local press picked it up. Army Mechanic starts foundation for girls in trades. My photo ran beside the article, uniform jacket zipped up. No makeup, just steady eyes. For once, the label Army Mechanic wasn't an insult. It was a headline. Lena's silence was louder than any words. She didn't text, didn't call, didn't show up, but through the grapevine, I heard plenty. An aunt mentioned that Lena complained about being overshadowed now. A cousin whispered that Noah had moved out for good. And one of her friends let slip that foreclosure papers had finally arrived. None of it made me gloat. It just confirmed what I already knew. When the lifelines dried up, people either learned to stand or sank. Lena had chosen to sink. Meanwhile, I poured energy into the foundation. I held the first small ceremony at a community college workshop, handing out toolkits and scholarships. One girl, barely 16, shook my hand with grease already under her nails. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, voice steady. "I won't waste this." That hit harder than any apology I'd ever begged from my family. Respect. Given freely, not bought with blood or silence. At the office, Olivia set a small plaque on my desk one afternoon. "I had this made," she said sheepishly. The brass plate read, "Delaney Foundation, Integrity in Action." I laughed, not the bitter kind, but real. "You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did," she said. "You needed something that says who you are, not who they said you were." The plaque stayed on my desk from that day forward. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that rebuilding wasn't just about scholarships. It was about reclaiming my own narrative. The calls from Mom slowed. The letters stopped. Lena faded from the conversation at family gatherings, but the silence no longer cut. It freed space for the voices that mattered, the young women applying for scholarships, the colleagues who respected me, the soldiers who knew my worth. One night, I stayed late in the office, reviewing applications. Outside, the hum of the cooling units filled the air, steady as ever. I thought about all the years I'd funneled energy into people who turned away from me. And here I was, finally channeling that same energy into something that might outlive me. The thought didn't ache. It settled, warm and solid. For the first time, I realized I didn't need a seat at my family's table. I had built a table of my own, and there were plenty of seats for those who deserved them. The foundation paperwork was stacked neatly on one corner of my desk, but my eyes kept drifting to the uniform laid across the chair. I'd ironed it earlier in the week, boots polished, patches squared away. Drill weekend was here, and it felt like stepping back into a world that made sense. When I pulled through the Fort Liberty gate at dawn, the lot was already full of trucks lined up for inspection. Soldiers milled about, some yawning into their coffee, others checking oil levels and tire pressure. I stepped out of my truck, slung my cap on, and the familiar call hit me. "Morning, Chief." "Morning," I answered, my voice sharper, lighter. The motor pool smelled of diesel, grease, and coffee, an odd mix, but to me it was the smell of belonging. I walked the line, clipboard in hand, nodding, as privates rattled off checklists. One kid fumbled with a wrench, dropping it onto the concrete with a loud clang. I bent down, picked it up, and handed it back. "Don't grip it like it's glass, Collins. Grip it like it owes you money." He grinned nervously. "Yes, Chief." Little things like that reminded me why I stayed in uniform all these years. Out here, I wasn't the distant cousin or the ATM sister. I was Chief Warrant Officer Quinn Delaney, the one who kept the fleet running, the one whose word carried weight. Respect wasn't begged for here. It was earned, and once earned, it stuck. Later that morning, during a break, I sat on the tailgate of a Humvee with Sergeant Ruiz, one of the younger NCOs I'd mentored since he was a private. He cracked open a water bottle and nodded toward the trucks. "You ever notice these kids don't listen until you show them you can actually do it yourself?" I smirked. "That's because words don't tighten bolts. Hands do." He chuckled. "Still though, they look at you like you're 10 feet tall. Half of them can't believe you've been doing this longer than they've been alive." That comment landed heavier than he realized. In this world, my years of sacrifice meant something. My calloused hands weren't shameful, they were proof. Proof that I had kept things moving. Proof that I had earned every stripe and every ounce of respect. In the afternoon, we ran convoy drills. Engines roared to life, radios crackled, and the line of vehicles stretched down the training field. I rode shotgun in the lead Humvee, headset on, guiding the formation through checkpoints. Dust swirled in the air, the sun beating down hard, but my chest swelled with something I hadn't felt in months. Pride that wasn't tangled up in resentment. At one point, a radio call came through from the rear vehicle engine trouble. I grabbed my toolkit without hesitation. Within minutes, I was on the ground, sleeves rolled, grease smearing across my hands. 2 young soldiers hovered nervously. "Chief, you sure you want to?" one started. I cut him off. If I didn't want to, I wouldn't be here. We had the truck running again in 15 minutes. When the engine roared back to life, the look on those kids' faces, relief, respect, admiration, was the kind of validation my family had never given me. Not once. Back in the motor pool at the end of the day, Ruiz clapped me on the shoulder. "Chief, you ever think about retiring? You've done your time. You've got the business, the foundation. You could hang it up." I shook my head. "Not yet. The Army's messy, but it's honest. And I'd rather stay in a family that respects me than crawl back to one that doesn't." He nodded, quiet for once. He understood. That night, after chow, I sat alone outside the barracks, boots dusty, uniform wrinkled, but heart steady. The sky stretched wide and clear, stars sharp against the dark. I thought about Lena, about Mom, about the letter now reduced to ash in my sink. For years, I'd wanted their approval so badly it ate at me. But sitting there under the stars, hearing soldiers laugh and shout inside the barracks, I realized I already had approval that mattered. I thought about the young mechanic who'd shaken my hand at the scholarship ceremony, about the kids in the motor pool who looked to me for guidance, about the NCOs who trusted me without question. That was family. Not blood, not guilt. Family that chose you because you showed up and did the work. When lights out came, I headed inside and lay down on the stiff barracks bed. The hum of the air unit overhead was steady, almost comforting. I closed my eyes, and instead of old wounds replaying in my head, I saw the convoy lined up earlier that day, engines humming, ready to move because I had kept them alive. It struck me plain. Maybe I'd spent too much of my life trying to prove myself at the wrong table. Maybe the table had been here all along in the Army, in the crews who never asked where my degree was, who never mocked me for grease on my hands. They just asked if the truck would run, and I always made sure it did. That was enough. More than enough. And for the first time in years, I let that truth sink in without needing anything more. The drill weekend wrapped up with the usual inventory count, clipboards filled, vehicles parked in formation, soldiers heading home with greasy hands and tired smiles. I stayed behind in the motor pool, sitting at a folding table with my notepad open. Not a to-do list this time. Not an OPORD. Just 3 words at the top of the page. After action review. The Army had drilled the process into me. Every mission ends with an AAR. What went right? What went wrong? What can be learned? It didn't matter if it was a convoy through sandstorms or a field exercise that went sideways. You wrote it down, you owned it, you moved forward. This wasn't about trucks or training. This was about my family. I tapped the pen against the page and started with lesson 1. 1. Silence is not loyalty. For years, I believed keeping quiet about my sacrifices was noble. That not demanding recognition made me stronger. What it really did was make it easier for people to erase me. My silence didn't protect family unity. It just gave them space to rewrite the story without me in it. I wrote the words firmly. If you don't speak your worth, Don't be surprised when others pretend it doesn't exist. Lesson 2. 1. Boundaries are not betrayal. Cutting the autopay, freezing the scholarship, withdrawing business ties, it had felt ruthless in the moment. But boundaries weren't cruelty. They were clarity. Every dollar I sent without accountability had built the illusion that my family could depend on me forever. When I stopped, it wasn't revenge, it was honesty. Boundaries showed them who they really were without my scaffolding propping them up. I underlined the sentence, saying no is not betrayal. It's self-respect. Lesson 3. Build your own table. This one hit hardest. I'd wasted years begging for a seat at a table where my name was never spoken with pride. I thought family meant inclusion by default. But family that erases you isn't family. In the army, in my company, in the foundation, I'd built my own table. One where grease-stained hands had value, where respect came from contribution, not image. I wrote it clearly. If they won't give you a seat, build your own damn table and make sure the right people sit at it. I set the pen down, looked at the 3 lessons, and let out a long breath. No flowery words, no complicated analysis. Just truths that had cost me nearly $100,000 and a lifetime of trying to earn love from people who couldn't give it. My phone buzzed on the table. Another text from Lena. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Nothing she could write would undo the fact that my story was finally mine, not hers. I folded the notepad shut and slid it into my rucksack. The AAR wasn't for them. It was for me. Proof that I'd processed it, learned from it, and wasn't carrying it forward like dead weight. As I walked out of the motor pool, the sun was low on the horizon, throwing long shadows across the rows of trucks. I paused, looked at the vehicles gleaming in the fading light, and felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Those trucks would keep running because I made sure of it. My soldiers would keep moving because I trained them to. My foundation would keep growing because I refused to stay silent anymore. That was enough. Driving back, I thought about the nickname, the Army Mechanic. Once a sneer, now a title I wore like armor. Let them mock it. The Army Mechanic kept convoys alive, built a business from nothing, funded a future for girls who wouldn't let grease on their hands define their worth. The family I grew up with might never see me. But the family I'd chosen, the Army, my crew, the young women whose scholarships bore my name, they saw me clearly. And as far as I was concerned, that was the only recognition I'd ever needed. Looking back, I don't regret a single choice I made. Not the nights I stayed up fixing trucks, not the weekends I worked overtime to cover tuition, and not even the moment I burned the letter from my mother. Every step shaped me into someone who finally understood that respect isn't handed out like candy at a family party. It's earned through action, through sacrifice, through the grit to stand tall when others would rather you stayed small. For too long, I thought family meant unconditional loyalty, even when it came at the cost of my own dignity. I thought silence kept the peace, but silence only protected the people who erased me. Cutting the financial lifeline wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of survival. It was finally choosing myself over a system that had drained me dry. The Army taught me that a mechanic is never just a mechanic. We're problem solvers, lifelines, the difference between a convoy making it home or breaking down in the desert. And life isn't all that different. You either learn to keep things running, or you sit on the side of the road waiting for someone else to save you. My family chose the second option. I chose the first. What I've built now, the business, the foundation, the respect of soldiers who know my worth, matters more than any hollow approval from people who saw me as a wallet with boots. The truth is simple. Blood might make you related, but it doesn't make you family. Family is the people who stand with you, who respect what you bring to the table, who don't flinch when your hands are covered in grease. So if I had to sum it all up in one line, it would be this. I stopped begging for a seat at their table and built my own. And from now on, only the people who understand respect and integrity get a chair. That's not revenge, it's freedom.